Welcome back to Just One Question, which almost inevitably becomes two. We'll see what happens today because I've got a really special guest with us, a gentleman, and I use the term advisedly, named Jimmy Cannon, who is a voice and speech coach. But unlike many of us who are coaches in this field of public speaking anxiety and presence and executive presence, we always say we're not therapists. So you can talk about your past and your childhood and what's making you anxious if you want to, but we're not therapists. And yet we finally have somebody on the show who is a therapist and a voice and speech coach. So, Jimmy, I'm so excited, but before we get going, just tell me, how are you?
Nick, I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. Amazing. What a pleasure to be here. I'm very good. We've just, as I was explaining at the beginning, we've just gone on to Starlink. So the connection that we have is going to be very pure, very quick, and to the point is what I'm hoping. So on that note.
Yeah. It already looks like we're in trouble, but let's get going. Exactly. You're an acceptance and commitment therapist, and so you help people deal with anxiety. How did you come into this? Into this profession, and why voice and speech coaching as a specific aspect of that?
Absolutely. So I was a singer for a long time. So I had a whole career really of singing. I'm a jazz singer, and believe it or not, there does exist a jazz singers in England. So I lived in London for a long time, and I carved a career as a singer and also saxophonist. And so I've got loads of things popping up here. It's typical, isn't it? And turn those off. So the singing transferred into speaking. So I taught a lot of singing at music colleges and performance. And I found that I was very quick story. I was at a party. I was at a Eurovision party. I co-wrote a song with Eurovision. That's another story.
Of course you did. Yes.
Of course I did. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was at this party, and I was speaking to a gentleman, and we were talking. He was in advertising, and we were talking about the fact that he had to present to the team weekly, and and I said, I'm really interested in the voice. I'm really interested in how you manipulate the voice to get your ideas across, get your messages across, etc. And he said, if only we had some training, because we have to do presentations, and I'm absolutely what we call bricking it, very nervous, when we have to do it. So I thought that was probably 15, 20 years ago now, and I thought that was really interesting. I've since then had I did a master's in voice pedagogy, which is all about the physiology of the voice. What my mentor realized when I was working with her was that I was really interested in performance anxiety, particularly music performance anxiety, which went into public speaking anxiety. And I didn't realize at the time there are millions of people that are very, very nervous when having to speak in public. So I thought, well, how can I help people mitigate this? So she suggested that I study performance anxiety and do it and use a method called acceptance and commitment therapy. And very happy to go into that, but I don't want, it's a little bit boring. Well, actually, it's not boring. I find it really fascinating.
Yeah. So that's going to be my second just
well,
one
okay,
question.
well, yeah, okay,
so
yeah.
Go ahead, but finish your thought.
Okay, yeah. So so I mix. So what happened was people were coming to me, and they still do. They come to me with what they think of as a voice which is weak, monotone. It's limiting, and they're not getting their ideas across. They're not being listened to. So what they don't realize is it's mainly psychological. It's mainly a cognitive fusion of negative thoughts, negative feelings that they're experiencing. And what I help them do is not only improve their voice, they still want to improve the quality of their voice, but I help them reduce the anxiety to a degree.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about that approach. What's the first thing you'd say to somebody who came to you like that once you broke the news to them that it's not just their voice, it's really their whole psyche.
Mm.
They've got deep problems. This can take years and years of therapy. What's your next move after that? How do you get started with them? Let's make
Sure.
that simple. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So the first thing we do is breathing. So the
Mm,
first thing is that they're generally not taking enough breath in.
mm,
So they're taking short breaths, upper chest breaths.
sure.
They're not releasing the diaphragm and letting the abdominal muscles contract to allow the lungs to expand. And just doing that, just taking a very deep breath in
Hmm.
into the lungs, reduces the heart rate, releases endorphins, and allows them just to relax in the moment. So actually, if it's a very quick tip, if you can take a slow deep breath, maybe you're listening to a question or you're
Mm,
preparing to speak in the moment. That's one thing that you can do, is just to release those endorphins, just to relax a little. Then I teach them how to control the breath on the out breath.
mm,
So the out breath, if you can elongate your phrases. So most people, they take short breaths, upper chest breaths, and then therefore they are speaking in very short phrases. So as an actor and a public speaking coach, that if you can control your out breath and you can project your voice with with support from the correct muscles and from the breath, that you're going to have more control over not only the breath and the sound, but also the content and
mm,
how that's delivered.
mhm,
So that's the main thing. If in fact there's been a lot of research, in very niche research, about the sympathetic nervous system, which is
mhm,
directly connected to all sorts of areas of the body,
mm,
abdomen, larynx, diaphragm, etc. So where if you elongate the phrases, so lengthening the length of your phrases as you speak, will directly connect to the vagus nerve, which will then reduce the anxiety, or control the switch in the
mhm,
sympathetic nervous system, which tells your body to get into fight flight mode. So rather than, if you're somebody that feels very nervous when you're about to speak or in the middle of a presentation or pitch, etc., then you can control that switch, and instead of going straight into fight flight mode and freezing, if you like, or
mhm,
stage
mhm.
fright,
Right.
that will mitigate that, or if you like, take a peripheral route around that at the
Wonderful.
same time. Yeah.
Wonderful. So give us a brief idea. This is just one question. Number three,
Mm, mm,
acceptance and commitment therapy. Tell us
yeah.
just a little bit more about that so we have some understanding of what you're talking about.
Right. Okay. So the first thing we do when I start working with clients with that is to establish values.
Mm,
So values are not necessarily goals. Values are answering the question, what is important to you?
mhm,
So thinking about what is important to you, it might be your family, it might be lifestyle, it might be that you're listened to, it might be that you're taken seriously or respected in your career. So establishing those values, and then what we do is we take committed action towards those values. And because if we can establish overall actually what is purpose, so if we can establish our purpose in life, or our purpose in our careers, when we're in a situation or an environment where we might feel nervous, or we might feel self-conscious about what we're saying, we might feel maybe a lack of self-worth or imposter syndrome, then we can decide with certain practice to commit to doing it regardless of those feelings, and towards the purpose that we have, which might be, I'm doing this because I want to improve my life. I want to improve my CPD. I want to get a promotion. I want to feel more confident, etc., etc., etc. Now, that's establishing values, and that's what we're working towards. The practice is to do present moment exercises. So the idea is that we keep in the present moment and not be distracted by any external, effusion of negative thoughts. And negative thoughts might be thoughts, as I mentioned before, lack of self-worth, imposter syndrome, self-consciousness, etc. Now, they generally are interpreted in the body as either a feeling or a somatic response. So it might be tight chest, tight throat, etc., if you're nervous.
I could ask you questions all day, but then they'd shut down the FCC would shut down the podcast as a complete lie and violation of its premise. Uh, so So the typical client comes to you, as you say, somebody looking for public speaking help because they think their voice isn't strong enough, and and your first step is get them in the present moment, and then you start beginning to talk about values. What's the what's the long term? Give us some idea of sort of how long this might take. Obviously, it could be very enormously depending on the commitment of the individual and the time and so on and so forth. But I'm just curious: do you see this as a lifelong journey or a relatively quick reorientation?
The reality that, as you said, it's very much to do with their commitment and their logistically, their emphasis on that. But the normally, so my session is normally 3 months, between
Hmm.
3 and 6 months,
Hmm.
and I normally, in fact, I always get results with that, depending on if they have to put the practice in, they have to implement the practice. It's generally so. What's really interesting is that it's generally somebody's personal perception of how they come across. So we do that by measurement. So we do that by we obviously I obviously record the first session. I really encourage recording because more than anyone else is self-criticism or watching yourself back is an awful thing, but it's an incredibly important thing to do, and it's a terrible. And I hate doing it myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but you have to. Yeah.
Well, I think you have to learn, and it's something that I didn't do for a long time, but when I did, I felt that I improved. Something that I noticed was my posture on stage. I didn't realize until I had watched a video, and I thought, oh my God, I look terrible.
Mhm.
I've got to change that. So
Mhm.
so since then, but you don't. Nobody's going to tell you this,
Right.
and unless you've got an HR manager or a very, very good colleague or friend that's going to say, hey, your voice it's not very powerful. You're not using your eye contact. You're not coming across. You're not really, developing those communication skills. Then that's generally in HR. It's mostly going to be you, the perception that you have of yourself. So
Yes.
to answer your question, 3 to 6 months, but it is a long-term goal. We're
Mm.
all constantly improving ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. You remind me, I can't resist working a number of years ago now with a international team who was led by an Englishman who was very good himself at public
Mm,
speaking, had
mm,
come from a long line of ministers and in his father and his
mm,
grandfather and whatnot. So it was in the family.
mm.
And he didn't tolerate weak public speaking on with his employees who had to do a lot of it for
Mm,
clients.
mm.
And there was this one woman who was very smart and had very interesting things to say, and they called her Dolphin Lady behind her back because when she got up to speak, she was fine in person in small meetings, small groups, but when she got up to speak, her voice would go so high
Yeah,
because her throat would tense up and the various
yeah.
psychological issues that happen
Mm,
that they would make fun of her behind her back and say it was pops and squeaks and whistles like a
mm,
dolphin,
mm.
and nobody would tell her this to her face. And so I got hired to say, excuse me, I have to break the news to you. I've been sent by your peers to tell you your nickname is Dolphin Lady and you need to work on this. And of course, I told it in a much more sensitive and
Yeah,
understanding way than
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But um, that was an interesting
I imagine she was
job.
devastated, wasn't she? Yeah, yeah.
She was,
Mm, mm,
and then she did get over it to her enormous credit, and she
mm,
worked on it. But that took
mm,
about a year
mm.
because she had done her voice some damage, and I had to call in
Yeah.
a laryngologist, and we
Mm.
found nodes on her vocal cords,
Right,
and
right.
on and on and on, right,
Yeah.
from that long term
Mm,
damage
mm.
of holding things so tight. So yeah,
Yeah.
it can be
Well,
a
it's a
lifelong
perfect,
journey.
absolutely, it's a perfect example of that physiological response to some kind of anxiety. And most
Yeah,
people, you mentioned small groups, most people they're fine one to one.
yeah,
When they come on a discovery call, they're absolutely fine. And my immediate reaction is that your voice is fine. There's nothing wrong.
yeah.
I think it's just completely your perception. But then when they have to do a presentation I've got a new client at the moment. He's weekly presentations to the team. He's a
Mm.
project manager, and he just says he just completely freezes up everything. There's just this sort of haze around
Mm.
him that he's experiencing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The white the white noise, the tunnel vision,
The tunnel
the
vision, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
what happened
yeah.
when you're done. You have not a
Yeah,
clear
that's
idea what
right. Yeah,
happened. Yeah, I've worked with a
yeah,
few of those.
yeah.
The amazing Jimmy Cannon, everybody. This has been such a pleasure, and
Thanks, Nick.
I'm going to tip off. I don't usually do this, the audience, that we're going to keep talking after this is over. And so, if you want to find out more about Jimmy Cannon, you're going to have to go to his website. You're going to have to get in touch with him
Yeah.
because this is a great opportunity to meet a fellow
Mm.
practitioner who has such fascinating expertise. Jimmy, thank you for being on Just One Question.
My pleasure, Nick. I hope to speak again.